folks, I'm Melhorn. In this video, I'm going to go over some advanced techniques for using one of the best catfish rigs that there is, the Santee rig. Well folks, if you're not familiar with the Santee rig, it got its name from the legendary lakes in the low country of South Carolina known as Santee Cooper. They are two giant, massive lakes that were built right before World War II, and they are known worldwide as the Mecca for catching catfish. Now these lakes are massive lakes, miles across, 8-9 miles across at some points. And one of the more popular techniques there was to drift across the lakes, basically using the wind, and this lake gets a lot of wind built up on it, to pull boats across the lake. What they needed was a rig that could go along the bottom, keep the hook from getting snagged on something on the bottom, and be able to bounce over structure, limbs, rocks, that type of thing. What they developed was something somewhat similar to the Carolina rig, but instead of having a movable weight, it was attached to the swivel and the connection that went to the leader line. On that leader, there was a cork, a float, that would float your bait and your hook up off of the bottom so it didn't get dragged through the mud and also didn't get snagged on anything on the bottom. Now the rig itself is really ridiculously simple. All you need is your main line. It's attached to a snap swivel. The snap swivel ties onto your leader. At the end of your leader is a hook, but on the line, the thing that makes it kind of different is a cork, a float, something to float that bait up. For years, the most popular way to do it was with a peg float, 1.5 to 3 inch peg float. But what we're going to go over are some of the more advanced techniques and things you can add to tweak and make this rig even better than it already is. Now, one of the first things we started doing many years ago was adding rattles to the cork. Back in the day, we were adding worm rattles. These were little glass rattles. They're basically an enclosed little glass tube that had metal beads in it. Bass fishermen use them, and they're the guys who made them popular. They would take these and put them inside rubber worms, inside different plastic, soft plastic baits, and it would add a little bit of noise and vibration. What we ended up doing was taking these rattles and replacing the peg in the float, the cork, or just putting them inside that same hole. It added a little bit of noise, it added a little bit of vibration, and it was a very cheap and what we thought was an effective tool for maybe inciting a little bit of a bite and creating a little bit of noise to create some more excitement. Now since then, they've come out with some better options. The folks at Hooker's Terminal Tackle sell what they call inline rattles, which are basically two little plastic cylinders that hold a rattling ball. Your line goes through it and you can put it on the line adjacent to your float. Some people put it up toward the hook. I suggest you keep it behind the float so that it does not interfere with your hook setup. It offers some noise as it goes through the water and as it tumbles, and also at hook set, when a fish takes the bait, it can cause some rattling and make some noise. Some people put one, some people put two, some people put several of them. But any way you look at it, the inline rattles from Hooker's Terminal Tackle is one way that you can soup up your Santee rig. Now, as these rattles became more popular, some folks realized that they could take topwater lures, bass lures that float on top of the water. These lures are designed not to sink, not to go deep in the water, and a lot of them, like the Zaraspook, have little balls inside of them that rattle and make noise. People started putting these onto that Santee rig to replace the cork float. The Demon Dragon became a popular brand name and has kind of become the Kleenex of the rattling lures in the catfish world name. But they're all pretty much the same. They're a Zaraspook style blank that you can paint up to look like a fish. You can paint it a solid color like a cork. But it basically takes the place of not only the floating action on the Santee rig, but also add some noise, and it can add a visual look that some people think may work to attract fish. Now, the way these rigs were originally designed was so that the sinker was fixed in place by the snap. But there's a little trick that you can do to turn this into a Carolina rig by adding a sinker slide. Now, you're probably wondering, what is the advantage for doing this? Well, one, some people believe that maybe the pulling, that line being able to pull free may help with the bite. For me, what I think the biggest advantage for doing this is in case you decide to go anchor up somewhere and you want something that's similar to a Carolina rig and you don't want to retie a bunch of stuff, you can take your Santee rig, put a sinker slide onto the line, take your cork, slide it up towards the swivel, and you've got basically a Carolina rig there. That's if you want your bait laying on the bottom. Now, some people want the bait floating up off the bottom. In that case, you'd leave your cork slid further down the line. The one bad part to doing this is if you are not in current or someplace where you can keep your lines tight, say you're on a lake anchored up and you've got some boat sway going on, that cork will float it up through the water column to different heights because the sinker slide is not locking it in place. That may be good, that may be bad, but it's something that you need to keep in mind if you decide to put a sinker slide on there and allow the cork to be further up the line. Now, one of the other big variables on a Santee rig is the length of leader. The length of that leader determines how far off the bottom your baits are floating. Generally, for me, I am having my leader length about 18 to 24 inches. And I've got my cork about 2/3 up the line from the sinker. Now, depending on the conditions, what's going on with the fish, you can increase the length of that leader line. I've seen some people do it 3 or 4 feet to suspend these baits way up off of the bottom. Now, is there an advantage to doing this? Probably in some cases, depending on where the fish are. Sometimes it can be a bigger advantage than suspending them underneath floats as you are drifting through the water. A lot of people feel that the hookup ratio is better on the Santee rig than it is on having a suspended bait underneath a bobber or underneath a planer board. That's for you to decide on your style of fishing and how it works. But it is an option and a big variable there on the leader length. That's something that I get a lot of questions about. Again, for me, 18 to 24 inches seems to work just fine, but you can adjust that for your style of fishing. Now, one thing I'm going to touch on with the Santee rig, because I get this question a lot on my guide trips, and that is how far I put the lines out, the Santee rig behind the boat. A lot of people are kind of shocked when they get on the boat and they see that the line is not straight underneath the boat. It's not going straight down. It's way out there, 75, 100, 125 feet. What I believe is that less angle going out through there versus going straight down helps with the hook setup when a fish takes that bait. What I'm getting at is if that line is straight down underneath the boat and the fish goes side to side, I feel like you don't have as much resistance for that circle hook as you do at a longer angle with that boat moving. So that's my theory on it. It does come into play. Some people wonder about whether it's because fish are scared of the boat. I really don't think in deeper water that matters. Perhaps in shallower water, when you're in 5, 6, 7 feet of water and you're drifting through it, it may play a part. I don't think it really matters out there in 15, 20, 30, 50 feet of water. The angle of the lines for me seems to be a better hookup ratio when they're out behind the boat. So when you look at my videos and you see where those lines are, keep that in mind. There are good ways out behind the boat. One last note on the Santee rigs, I snell my hooks onto the rig. I use that, I like keeping them in line, and that seems to give me a better hookup. On the other end, I am just using a regular improved clinch knot. You can use whatever you want to on those other ends, Palomar knots, whatever is most convenient for you to tie. I'm using what works for me. Any of these knots are going to work, guys. Don't get too bent out of shape and worry about the knot. The knot doesn't catch the fish. Putting the bait in front of the fish in the right place at the right time is what gives you the opportunity to catch fish. Well, folks, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Here are a couple more videos that I think you're going to like. I'd watch that one and then that one. No, do that one first and then that one. I don't know. Just watch them both. They're both good.